How's it going? Welcome back, my beautiful sinners, to another great and amazing moist video with your boy, the Savior. That's right, get lubed up, Sonny Jim, because that's right, we're gonna take a deep dive into Star Wars Battlefront 2005, a retrospective of Star Wars Battlefront. This is my retrospective review of Star Wars Battlefront, the PS2 version. Join this fantastic growing community today, my boys. Become a sinner and I will give you a nice little sponge bath and you will become pure by the Savior. Don't worry about it, okay? Just don't ask any questions. Join the channel and join this community. Become a member today for extra content, shoutouts, and collabs. Sit back and relax and enjoy this Star Wars Battlefront retrospective review. I would say for the people who have only ever played the new Star Wars Battlefront games that you're really missing out on something special here, okay? So this game, Star Wars Battlefront, was released in 2005. It was a sequel to the original Star Wars Battlefront, okay? And that was pretty good. Star Wars Battlefront 2 had so much more offered in it than the original Star Wars Battlefront, okay? It had space battles, it had galactic conquest, it had a story campaign with really interesting themes, and it was such a great game, okay? This was pretty much one of the best Star Wars games to ever release, in my opinion. Now, as years have gone on, I feel like we have kind of lost the Star Wars identity. I don't like Disney Star Wars. I feel like it's completely ruined nowadays. It's not interesting. The 3 Disney Star Wars movies, in my opinion, were absolutely terrible and they just destroyed Star Wars. Nowadays, the Star Wars games like Star Wars Battlefront and Star Wars Battlefront 2 from EA were pretty much a disappointment for many people, with the microtransactions, the gameplay that was lacking, the features that were lacking, and it just felt kind of empty and hollow. Graphically, it was very nice and shiny and beautiful, but the actual gameplay was lacking for many people, and for some people they really enjoyed it. So let's begin with why Star Wars Battlefront 2 was so amazing and why it's much better than the modern day games where Star Wars is just completely juiced and the gameplay is just completely lacking and boring. It's the same old mechanics. So the original campaign, you played through a story that was really interesting to me, because you start out as a clone trooper and then you go through the kind of history of Star Wars and the timeline of Star Wars, and then you actually in the end become a stormtrooper. Pretty much you go through the whole story of Star Wars, but through the perspective of a clone trooper and that clone trooper regiment, which is really interesting. So like I said, you start out as a clone trooper and then by the end of it you're a stormtrooper fighting the rebels. So you're fighting in the Clone Wars and you're fighting the rebels as a stormtrooper, which is really cool to see that transformation and the history of Star Wars, but through the perspective of a clone trooper and a stormtrooper. And the story is really well done, in my opinion. The cinematics were pretty cool. It wasn't anything special. The thing that made Star Wars Battlefront 2 so good was the objective-based gameplay and the amount of crazy on-screen action that was happening, especially for those times. It was really cool, you know, fighting aliens as well as fighting standard rebels or fighting the standard droids. You would have, usually in these levels, different enemy types which would vary up the gameplay. You would have different objectives. Everything would have its own unique physics. So if you chucked a grenade, people would go flying. It was all very entertaining. It was much more tactical than the newer games, where you actually use tactics and you can actually control your troops. Another thing that made it really cool was you actually had a limit of how many troops you had for any given battle. So you would see a counter of how many of your troops were left and how many of their troops were left. That gave the game a real sense of this battle is actually happening, and it made it feel way more pressured in a good way. Hunt down the last remaining enemies or band together. It was really cool to see the Star Wars story and the Star Wars history unfold, but through the perspective of a clone trooper and then a stormtrooper with his squad, and have these battles where, you know, actually every man counts. It's not just an endless spawning. It doesn't matter if you die, every life matters, and you actually get to see the numbers of both sides go down, which gave it a real sense of urgency. The other thing that made Star Wars Battlefront, the original Star Wars Battlefront, the PS2 and the 2005 Star Wars Battlefront so amazing was also the multiplayer, okay? You had so many different types of multiplayer. You had these massive space battles where you could actually board the other person's ship and sabotage their spaceship from within, which was really cool, or you could go and attack individual parts of the massive galactic ships and bring it down from the outside, or do a combination. So there was a lot of tactics at play, and it made it feel really grand and open, way more than the linear kind of battles you see with the newer Star Wars Battlefront games, which really are just terrible if you ask me. And you would have this extra mode called Galactic Conquest, and this mode was so cool. Basically, you could play it on split screen, you could play it on multiplayer. Galactic Conquest made Star Wars Battlefront 2 really an amazing game if you ask me, because you would basically, invade the galaxy. You would choose different planets. It was kind of like a game of chess. You could move one space at a time, move from one location at a time. You would have an overtop view of the galaxy, and you could move one step at a time and choose to attack a planet or just completely ignore it. And then after you attack a planet, you gain points if you win or if you lose, and then you can use these points to invest in perks, invest in more troops, invest in better weapons, invest in a special type of troop. It would actually give you choice and tactics. It actually really felt like you were invading a whole galaxy, because it would give you choice. Later on in the Galactic Conquest, you could be invaded again after winning that planet over and have that planet taken away from you if you lose it. So it really did feel like a whole galactic battleground, and it would actually reward the player who wins the battle with special abilities and points, and basically ways to win the overall battle, because you could then invest, like I said, in stronger troops, or you could wait and use a special ability which would actually just dominate a planet straight away or destroy that planet, like with the Death Star or something. It was so cool and really in depth that you just don't get to see that in the newer games. It had so much content packed into it, and it was all actually interesting and unique mechanics that we haven't seen since then. They actually experimented with new mechanics. It actually felt like it had a soul, it had purpose, it actually rewarded the player, and this was so fun back in the day with split screen and with multiplayer. And now, since then, we haven't seen like that kind of mechanic in a Star Wars game or in any kind of game for a long time. They weren't just better because of nostalgia, they actually were much better designed, and they had way more going for them. They weren't just greedy companies trying to juice as much money from the consumer as possible. They actually had a great story, unique modes like Galactic Conquest, an interesting space battle mode where you could actually invade the other person's ship. What it lacked in graphical detail, it made up in the actual gameplay detail and the gameplay mechanics way more than we see in modern day Star Wars games and modern day games in general. So that is why Star Wars Battlefront, the 2005 Star Wars Battlefront, was so special, and that is my retrospective of Star Wars Battlefront 2005. If you've never played this and you've only played the modern day games, I highly recommend that you go back and play this. This is what made Star Wars games such a joy to play, because all the different unique mechanics and the massive amount of content and choice that you would get in this game was so cool, and we just don't see anything like that. And the fact that they just used the name Star Wars Battlefront to basically get the people's hopes up that it was going to be like this type of game, when in fact it was just a standard first-person shooter with EA, just shows you the greed that these gaming companies have nowadays, and they just don't care about creating a unique experience. It's all just about graphical detail and, standard first-person action, not experimenting with new mechanics, or not even bringing back things from the old games like Galactic Conquest, which really made the game so much more engaging and rewarding to play. I hope you enjoyed this retrospective review of Star Wars Battlefront 2 from 2005, and I'll see you in the next video, my sinners. Peace out.